Initially, I started down the self-help journey or rabbit hole, I guess, mainly from when I was in sixth form, and although I had friends, there was this underlying sense of kind of loneliness. It was really weird for me to even explain now why it was, but maybe a part of me just felt like I never really connected with people on a more of like a deeper level. And I think a big thing for me was during that time, sixth form, where I was in this state of loneliness, is I really wanted to change. I was in this sort of like vulnerable state, I guess, where I really wanted to change up how I was feeling and what was going on with me at the time. So that kind of led on to me like searching up like how to improve yourself as a person, and these kind of search terms are going to bring up self-help related content, and that obviously led to me finding these books, looking at these like gurus like Tony Robbins, where I was like really getting engrossed in the material, and it very quickly like I became very interested in self-help, and I started initially like pursuing these habits of meditation and going to the gym, and cold showers is also like a big thing that you do in the
Yeah.
self-help world. Now these things like are not bad things, right? Like they're all good things, and I even became more like focused on my goals and what I really want to get out of, like, I don't know, the next 10 years, or like career wise. Like my focus became a lot better, and my mood was a lot better. But what was happening was there there were these bits and pieces that I was noticing as I was going through all of this, where I realized that there were elements of common self-help tropes and teachings and from the gurus which felt a little bit weird. And what I mean by that is I experienced first this sense of like this idea of being positive all the time was something that's quite heavily pushed. If you've ever looked into things like, for example, the law of attraction
Yeah.
type of stuff, you'll know that like a big part of that is this idea of being, thinking very positive so that you attract positive things into your life, etc., etc. Problem with that is, of course, that's not really how things work. And or at least I came to realize is, things are going to be bad. You're not going to feel great. And one of the things that I talk about and I mentioned in the video is, for me, it came about when I was starting to lose my passion for acting,
Mhm.
and it was around that time where I was really going through this debate with myself mentally of like, should I give up? Like, what will other people think of me? Because I built this reputation on being an actor, and the kind of self-help stuff was nudging me in a direction where it was like, don't think negative, don't think negative. You can only be positive about this. But that wasn't true. That wasn't the case, and it felt like I guess the way of putting it is you're suppressing a side of yourself, which shouldn't really be suppressed, like feelings of like fear or like these negative emotions, like they exist for a reason. Sometimes they're there just because of, some kind of chemical imbalance or whatever it is, but normally you get these emotions because there's a reason for it. And what I noticed was the way in which I had developed my mindset from the self-help side was that it was pushing me in a direction where I was like really pushing these emotions down. That was the first thing. Second thing that I noticed was I would talk to a lot of people who were into self-help as well, because naturally I just gravitated towards those communities because of common similar interests and whatnot. And what you start to notice is when you talk to these people is at first you'll find that the backstories and the way in which they get started with this is very similar. Like my story isn't unique at all. You've probably noticed this when you've spoken to people or seen stuff about this. Like, it normally starts with someone who isn't as comfortable or happy in their position as they are. Like,
Yeah.
naturally, why would you want to get into self-help if you were in a comfortable position? And what happens is, when I speak to these people, you start to see that they go down this route of picking up these good habits, becoming more centered on whatever goals they're going for. But then there's this feeling of like constant non-stop, like getting the next book, watching the next course, attending the next seminar, following this new, like another guru. And it almost gets to the point where it's like, well, hang on, what's is there an end to this? Because and of course you're never going to stop improving. Like, you, it's a bad thing to never stop progressing with whatever you're doing in life. Like, I'm not going to say that you should stop at some point, but the part of me that was a little, like, felt a little weird was the fact that it's like constantly following these new gurus and these new techniques and these the I talk about in the video, I call it like the next best thing, sort of thing, where you pursue like the next best meditation technique, the next best trick that's going to 10x your income or whatever it is. And then you start to realize that there are people, and especially on the guru side of things, where they've built a whole like business, a whole, like, if you look at someone like Tony Robbins, like, this guy has his whole empire built on this stuff. It's like, when you're at that point, there's no really, like, you can't stop, right? It's like you've got to keep producing something. You've got to produce the next book. You've got to produce the next program. And so you start to realize, well, that's a bit of an issue when ideally you're supposed to be working on yourself, but now you have these guys who are constantly bringing out products. It's like now there's almost a conflict of interest um, where the idea of you getting better and progressing is actually a complete contradiction to what the guru is trying to do, which is they need those customers to come in, and they need like that continual flow of business. If everyone was happy and content, then bye bye revenue, you know. Um, so that was another thing. And these probably are the two major elements that I noticed that were, for me personally, really toxic. But then you have things like hustle culture, which, although I never struggled too badly with, I know it exists a lot, which is the idea of constantly telling people that you got to work hard, and this idea of what you're like, well, what's the point? Are you just working hard for the sake of working hard? Do you actually have a goal? Are you progressing towards that in a way which is actually smart? Um, and what you notice is that quite a lot of the time it's not, and the idea of hustle culture and working hard almost becomes a way in which you can get brownie points from social media in some cases, where it's like you're posting about how much you're working. I
Yeah.
mean, if you see like the, I call it new age entrepreneurship, where it's, you get the people on Instagram with the Lambo in the background, or they're just talking about how much they're hustling and working hard. And you talk to some of these people. Well, I know people like this, and again, because I was in like a lot of these communities, I was spoken to people like this, and you realize that they're not really doing anything. Like, nothing's really happening. It's much more of a facade. um,
Mm.
yeah, so that was a long way of answering your question, but those are generally the things I started picking up on when I was like really into the self-help community.